My name is Lisa Rana. I am an East Hampton Town Justice. I live in Springs presently. I've lived there since 2001, but I'm originally from Amagansett, a lifelong resident of East Hampton. Well, it's interesting because I had gone to New York City for a judicial training at the probably middle of February, and I had had dinner with a friend of mine who was very concerned about COVID, and that's when I really started to think about COVID and the impacts. And then probably a week later, she had called me and said to me, you know, this is something that's really real. I think you need to prepare for it. And I started to think about it at that point. Probably in the beginning of March, before anything really had happened, I started preparing my staff, saying, there might be something going on here that's unprecedented. I'd like you to start pulling the calendars for the future so that if for some reason we need to adjourn cases, we're prepared for it. It was really fortuitous because I had had that conversation with my friend. Otherwise, I would never have thought to do it. I've been a judge for nearly 20 years, and I had never been in a situation where the court actually closed. We were closed to the public until sometime in May of 2020. I did keep some staff on, and in the beginning I only had one staff person in the building at a time, and I used my two senior justice court clerks, and they took turns coming into the court to handle phone calls, emails, faxes. People were nervous because they didn't want to be accused of missing a court date or having any kind of negative consequences, and I wanted to make sure that the public was fully informed that that wasn't going to happen. We also heard cases virtually. We found it to be very efficient, and actually it's something that we're continuing to do. My co-judge, Judge Tukolsky, and I had a conversation about whether we wanted to have pro se, that is individuals who are representing themselves, appear virtually, and we both were in agreement that we would continue with the pro se cases in court. Some of the dispositions we do virtually, and some of the dispositions we do have them come into court. It's been eye-opening in that I believe working virtually on the dispositions and on the court conferences, especially in the criminal realm with the attorneys when they're really on for conferences, it's been a lot more efficient to be able to work virtually. Something that without the pandemic we probably never would have done. But if there is a disposition that requires an in-court appearance in a criminal case, and I'm really talking more about in the criminal cases in those situations, we will have everybody come in and still have in-court proceedings. Well, as a judge, it's making sure that we are able to communicate with the individuals that are part of the justice court, whether it's the attorneys, whether it's the individuals that might have a case in front of us, the staff, the community at large, as to what's going on here, what their cases are. Personally, as far as the community, I just tried to do my part in making sure that I did not infect anybody, that I followed all of the protocols that were put into place, to wear masks when it was required, but pretty much I stayed home like many of the other individuals did, and I had a glorious garden last year. When you have trying times, the community comes together, and I've always found that to be the case, whether it's in East Hampton during 9/11, I lived in New York City for some time. It's amazing what the community will do to reach out to people, whether it's helping to stock the food banks or helping to find people a place to go. People that are feeling very isolated, reaching out to them. I think this community is incredible, and I love East Hampton, and I love the fact that people always look out for each other here. But I have to tell you, I also found that in New York City during 9/11 when I was there. I think that people generally are very generous, and there's a good spirit, and when there's a crisis, people tend to come together. You can't always prepare for the unknown. It's like you can try to do your best, but you really need to be flexible in your approaches to things. You know, when I go back to 9/11, no one expected that. At that time, I was the chief of staff of the Taxi and Limousine Commission in New York City, and you have to be flexible. You have to be able to think on your feet. Panicking is not really helpful, and just trying to remain calm and try to see things objectively and clearly is, you know, the way to do things. I would say isolation. I feel like people became very isolated during the pandemic. There was a lack of the human connections with their friends and their loved ones that they were really used to having. My mother was in Florida. She ended up being stuck in Florida and isolated in her condo by herself. We couldn't get to her. We couldn't travel down there. Those were really hard things to comprehend and to emotionally manage. You know, people need people. People need people to have interaction with people. And that kind of feeling of isolation, I think, had a real impact. And it was the most profound thing that I think people experienced during this pandemic.